dubious, don't you?
I spent many years in the United States, and I bought a bumper sticker when I was out there, which I had on my car and I now have in my fridge. And I thought it was a bit of a joke, typically American, when I bought it. I now think it's a bit of interesting political commentary. And the bumper sticker says, "I love my country. It's the government I'm afraid of." And I'm afraid that I have come to the conclusion that the Americans are right about that, as indeed they are about other things. Look, whatever way people voted about Brexit, I've been travelling up and down the country, and people have been coming to meetings like this on terrible nights like this when they could be sitting and watching rubbish television instead. And we're all here, again, no matter what way you voted, because we're worried about the future of our country. And that is true, I think, of many people who voted for Brexit. There may be some here, I hope there are. It's true of people who voted for Brexit, as well as those of us who certainly did not vote for Brexit. And I want to talk about something which I think is bigger than Brexit, but which inspired me to write the book. And that is the normalisation of lying in our public life. We are all very aware of it, are we not? The European Union, the DUP, the former Chancellor Philip Hammond, the Shadow Chancellor John MacDonnell, and many other people, including, you might say, the Court of Session in Scotland, have all suggested in varying ways that they do not believe our Prime Minister is telling the truth. And neither do I. I was asked that question most recently on Irish radio. It was the first question I was asked: do you believe what Boris Johnson said? And I had to answer no. And I was kind of astounded by it, but also I think that is unfortunately where we are now. And why I say this is bigger than Brexit, it's because if we let them get away with telling us lies about Brexit, they will tell us lies about something else. And that will be the NHS, or it will be the Union of the United Kingdom, or it will be, I don't know exactly what it will be, but they'll think of something. It will be the 40 new hospitals, or the 50,000 new nurses, or the 20,000 new police officers, forgetting the 21,000 that were got rid of. So, if that happens, we enter Trumpland. And if we enter Trumpland, goodness knows what will happen to this country. Just a quick word about the title of the book. I mean, I discussed with my publisher whether we should call it Brexit Without the Bullshit, because I wondered if people thought if there was no bullshit in Brexit, what would there be left? A bunch of empty pages. I promise you there are some words in there somewhere. Some of them are quite good. They may not be in the right order, but they're great. But the other critic was one of my daughters, who said, "Daddy, I don't think you should put a swear word on the cover of a book." And I said, well, you know, BS, it's not the worst thing. Not bullshit, she said, Brexit. The one thing that strikes me is the lengths to which some of our political leaders have gone to avoid telling us the truth. Just to take one example, the Yellowhammer Report. The Yellowhammer Report, as we all know, came out in September. Much of the stuff that was in the report, I was talking to people in very, very fine civil servants who were doing the best for our country. I was talking to them in April and May. They knew all this stuff. They know all this stuff. And so did many other people. Most of the stuff is open source. It's just that the government isn't prepared to tell us. And you may like to ask yourself why. But the Yellowhammer Report is a good example of that. It was published by the Sunday Times in September. Our government went out of their way to rubbish the report. They said it was out of date. It was dated August. How stupid do they think we are? So I felt I needed to know some of the facts about what Brexit would look like and how it would affect our daily life. And I've suggested that the normalisation of lying is at the top. Trumpland and Boris Johnson. We'll get onto them in a moment. But it filters down to people we meet in the street. And if you're campaigning for any political party talking about Brexit, you will realise that ordinary, decent British citizens that you meet, who try to be honest and who do a good day's work and who voted for Brexit, when you ask them why, they come out with stuff which is nonsense. Yes. And it's not because they're bad people, it's not because they're stupid people. But just to give you two examples, I was campaigning for Change UK in Argyle Street near Oxford Street tube station in London, handing out leaflets, being slightly annoying, I suppose, because people were trying to get home for the tube. But actually, people talked. Most people actually took a leaflet and were quite happy to chat. One woman said, "I'm not going to vote for you, I'm going to vote for Nigel Farage." And I said, "Do you mind me asking you why?" And she said, "Because the European Union is completely undemocratic." So I said, "You're voting in a European election for a member of the European Parliament, and you're prepared to vote for somebody who's been a member of that Parliament for 20 years, because you talk me through the bits that are most undemocratic." And she said, "I hadn't thought of it that way." Now, I'm sure she voted for Mr. Farage, that's her right, but it was very interesting that the nonsense which has affected and infected our public life for years filtered through to a decent person who was just trying to get home from work. And then in Conway Hall, in August, I was at another public meeting, and a lady there said she voted for Brexit, and I said, "Would you mind telling me why? I mean, what was in your mind in 2016 when you voted for Brexit? What version of Brexit did you vote for?" And she said, I quote, "I voted for a clean Brexit, leaving the EU without a deal on October the 31st, 2019. Now, she couldn't have. And I said, "You couldn't have." And she got very cross. She's not a bad person. Again, she was a perfectly articulate person, a well-educated person who has swallowed the nonsense. A Clean Brexit was the name of a book published in 2018. As you all know, October the 31st was a date that was set in the spring because the deadline didn't work. So what's going on? Well, this isn't my first book. I've written about half a dozen novels and 2 or 3 other works of non-fiction. But this is the first book I've ever written that was reviewed before anyone read a copy, except me and my publisher. That's it. It was extraordinary. And it was on Amazon, the review. And the review, I love the review, so I'm going to read it to you. It says, the headline says, "Dangerous propaganda in an illiterate package. There is every chance that this assembly of extremist fantasies will prove of adequate sophistication to appeal to today's rabid left-wing extremists." That's you, madam. And perhaps you. Perhaps it is you, I don't know.
I'm Spartacus.
There's always one Spartacus. I'm Spartacus, well done. I think we're all Spartacus. To the even slightly educated, it will appear too crass and vulgar to bear. This book is the product of a man who projects his fantasies over reality almost to the degree of psychosis. So you know what you're in for. Look, facts and truth and science are at the heart of what makes our country great.
Yes, yeah.
We are an enlightened country with a small e, and we are an enlightenment country. We are the country of the Enlightenment. So much that we stand for, even round here, just as we walk around the streets, is about the Enlightenment and about science and about sticking to the truth. And if we continue to push ourselves, both from the top of our government right down to the man or woman in the street, along a road in which we deny climate change, deny science about vaccination, deny the problems that Brexit's going to cause us, we are going to be in real trouble, because that is the unenlightenment. And Boris Johnson is part of that. And we all know that Brexit is not an event, it's a process. And so the other bit of salesmanship, which they are very good at, by the way, and I'll get back to that, get Brexit done. 2 out of those 3 words are nonsense. I mean, we all understand get. Brexit, we still have not agreed what Brexit is going to look like. We still don't know what's going to happen after December 2020, when we're supposed to have some further trade deal with the European Union, which, frankly, I don't believe. And I'm sure you don't believe either. We still don't know what Brexit is, and then done. As you well know, if we leave in January, by 1st of February, Brexit will not be done. That's when it starts. And of course, the great thing about Boris Johnson's lying is that if after an election, he then says, you know that December 2020 deadline when I said I'd be dead in a ditch, or whatever nonsense he comes up with, he could just change his mind again. Who knows? Because that's the way he is. It's about the psychology of our leader rather than about the politics. let us just have a quick look at some of the facts, because what I tried to do in the book was say, if we do leave the European Union, what are the things that we know that will be affected in our lives? If, you may know that all of our insulin basically is produced in the EU 27. It's not produced here. Gentlemen, if you require Viagra, now is a good time to stock up. It's all made in Ringaskiddy, County Cork, which must be a fun town, I must say.
Fine outstanding town.
It's fine outstanding town, I told you. There's all kinds of things that will change. You may already know about international driving permits. If you go to my local post office, said to me, you do realise there's one for Spain, Malta and Cyprus, which lasts 1 year, and one for the rest of the EU, which lasts 3 years. I've got two, just in case. They look like, I don't know what 1950s ration cards look like, but that's what they look like. And the post office lady was very apologetic. She had to fill it all in by hand. I mean, welcome to the 21st century Britain. Then there's reciprocity. I'm just back from Gibraltar. I was invited to go to the Gibraltar Literary Festival, in part because there's so many British expatriates in the south of Spain who have woken up to the word reciprocity. In other words, if we do it to them, they'll do it to us. And among the many things, well, they're worried about a lot of things. Those on fixed incomes are worried already that they've lost a considerable amount of their pension funds, pension money, because of the pound going down. Healthcare. I can simplify this by telling you what a Spanish journalist told me. It's rude, but I'm going to say it anyway. We send you our young Spaniards to work, you send us your old British to die. And many of the British people who've retired to the south of Spain are extremely worried about that. The people of Gibraltar, 96% of Gibraltar voted to remain. There's another border that we don't talk about, just like the Irish border. Although, Boris Johnson said the Irish border is not really any different from that between Islington and Camden, so he probably thinks the Gibraltar-Spanish border is the same. I don't know what he thinks of that. And then there's something worse, and this to me is something I notice and something that I find very alarming, but I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'd like to talk you through it anyway, which is our soft power around the world. We are known as a problem-solving, brainy country. We've got great universities here in Bath. We've got, one Cambridge college, I think, has got more Nobel Prize winners associated with it than all of China. We're pretty smart as a country. We solve problems. We are quite admired. One of the great things about our role within the European Union was we sent some of our best and brightest diplomats. One of them said to me, very angrily, under Mrs. Thatcher, whatever you think of her politics, she was always in the room. She always knew more about it than anybody else in the room, and she didn't suffer any fools within the diplomatic service giving her the wrong information. We're not like that anymore. Foreign newspapers are obsessed with the idea that we are still talking about Spitfires when we should be talking about artificial intelligence in the 21st century. And that's not to demean anybody in the past who fought in the Second World War or anything else, but we don't live there anymore. And we don't live in 2016 anymore either, for that matter. So let me just give you a flavour of what some of these foreign publications and so on are saying about us. I go to Germany quite a lot, and in Germany there's a very sober news magazine which described a local MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, as potentially our next Prime Minister. This was about 6 months ago. But they also called him Das lebende Fossil. The living fossil. In Ireland, Boris Johnson, I can't tell you how stand-up comedians love him because of some of the stuff he said. A previous Northern Ireland Secretary, Karen Bradley, seemed confused that Unionists and Nationalists in Northern Ireland don't vote for the same people. Who knew? Everybody! United States, you may have seen the New York Times did a page and a half on a man they called Failing Grayling and asked the question, how do you become Chris Grayling? Now that's a little bit out of date. We've got new luminaries in there. So I think what we've got to do is somehow try to figure out in every individual conversation how to up our game and touch people in how they feel about our country, because we have got the facts. And the facts will eventually win, but I don't want to have to go through a shortage of insulin or ractopamine in our food or a bad trade deal with the United States. And just a final word. One of the meetings I was at, a lady said she was very pro-Brexit, and I said, why? And she said, because of sovereignty. And I asked her what she meant about sovereignty. What was this thing that we were going to get that she hadn't got? And she couldn't think of an answer. But there is something about that and her sense of patriotism that we have got to touch better. And it's not enough just to say it's very silly to go on about sovereignty. Sovereignty, essentially, but it's about power. We will be less powerful. We'll lose sovereignty the weaker we are. And so we have got to make, it seems to me, the patriotic case that Britain is better than Brexit. Thank you.